Hi there, welcome to today's video. In today's video, we're doing something a little bit different. I wanted to sit down and sort of share with you what happens when you do yoga. And the way I wanted to do that is by walking you through my personal journey, how yoga got introduced to my life, and some of the things that I have seen change in my life when I started and continued doing yoga. So the first time I got introduced to the practice of yoga was actually when I was around 13 or 14 and I was at school. It was part of our physical education class, and there we had a yoga session. It wasn't anything fancy. The teacher literally put in a CD and pressed play while she sat on the side, and we all followed the video instructor. But I remember at the end of the class walking out and feeling like there was a sort of veil lifted. I felt really like I could notice everything that was happening around me. It's like the colors were more vibrant. It's like I could hear more intricate sounds. And this was actually quite fascinating. It was a really cool feeling. And I knew at that point that I really wanted to practice yoga again just to see if I could sort of recreate that feeling. And this is where the first aspect of what happens when you do yoga comes in. And the aspect that I experience is that your mind starts to become more focused. I don't have the science behind this, but I'll just explain to you how I see it or why it works this way. When you're a part of a yoga class, you're really directing your focus to one aspect, whether it's a certain posture, what are your shoulders doing, what's your pelvis doing, or directing your attention to your breath, for example. And having that sustained focus, even if it's just for a couple of minutes or an hour, coming out of that class, it's a lot easier to maintain that focus, even if it's just for a couple hours afterwards. And I think this is one of the most wonderful benefits that I have experienced from doing yoga. After this class that I had at school, it was also around this time that there was a new yoga studio that opened in the community where I used to live. And I sort of dragged my sister and convinced her to go and take a class with me to try out this new yoga studio. I think they had one of those deals where like the first class was free or heavily discounted, something along those lines. And I really enjoyed that class, and actually I continued going to that studio periodically while I was studying. But I remember that one of the things that really struck me about that studio and about that class was this sort of really warm, welcoming feeling that was in that yoga studio. And actually, I've been to a lot of yoga studios after that, and I've never been able to find the exact same feeling. So I do think that this studio is quite special in that way. But this is another aspect that I think is really important to mention as one of the things that happens when you do yoga. And that is that you get a new community, a new group of friends. And the community, of course, it's not with every yoga community. There are, of course, different ones that can maybe be not so nice. But in general, the yoga community, or just people that are, around your same age, that have the same interests, that are also really interested in moving their body and maybe more of the meditation side of yoga as well. Finding those types of people can feel really nice, and you can form some really meaningful relationships with that new community as well. One of the reasons I continued with that yoga studio was the community. And specifically, when when yoga became a really solid part of my life and a really regular practice in my life was actually when I graduated school, graduated university. There was this sort of weird year in between my bachelor's and my master's where I was sort of figuring out what to do. I was applying to different schools, working part-time. And during this time, I had quite a bit of free time on my hands. I could now drive on my own. I didn't have to ask my parents to drive me to the yoga studio. And one of the also wonderful things that happened at this time was that I could take advantage of, it's called sort of the karma yogi thing that this studio had. And what it meant is that for about 4 hours of volunteering my time at the studio, opening up the studio, checking the students in, cleaning up after the class, all of those things, processing any sales from the items we had. Doing that 4 hours a week, I could get free unlimited yoga classes. And this was amazing for me because I had the time, but I didn't necessarily have the money. I had just freshly graduated. And this sort of really took away one of the biggest barriers that I had when it came to practicing yoga regularly. And that's when I started going 3, sometimes 4 times a week. It became a really solid part of my life. And one thing I noticed during this period was that if something happened, maybe I became busy or I wasn't feeling very well and I had missed my regular routine, maybe I went only once to a yoga class this week, I began to notice sort of my body feeling strange. All of a sudden I was like, oh, wait a second, like my back hurts a little bit. Oh yeah, I haven't been to yoga in like a couple of days. Or I would notice, for example, I'm feeling a little bit iffy in my mood. Maybe I haven't been to a yoga class in a while. And I think this is one of the other wonderful things, it illustrates one of the other wonderful things that happens when you do yoga. And that is that you actually start to see differences in your body. And most particularly, the differences that I saw were in my posture and in my mobility. I, for example, had my parents comment, I lived with my parents at that time, comment, for example, when we were sitting and watching TV, how straight I was sitting up. And I would, again, notice if I didn't go to a class that all of a sudden I couldn't move as freely or I had a kink in my neck or something like that. And I think this is one of those benefits that really gets described quite a lot about sort of what happens when you do yoga. But I do think it is an important aspect. And it wasn't the first aspect I noticed. It was really after making it a practice that I did consistently, and maybe even after doing it consistently for 3 months or so. That is when I really started to notice that when I didn't go to yoga class, my body started to feel a little bit less smooth and flowy. So fast forwarding this whole period, I ended up getting into a master's program, moving to Amsterdam in the Netherlands. And this is at a period where I tried to sort of find other yoga studios in the Netherlands to really create and get that community back. But I just couldn't find anything that sort of fit me. A lot of the studios were quite far. I was, again, busy with studying, not so much money to spend. And this was a period where I got sort of a little bit frustrated with what the teachers or the classes were offering. Not that the classes were necessarily bad, but for example, some teachers would focus a little bit more on the meditation part or the mantra, the singing, where I wanted a little bit more alignment cues. Sometimes I would go in thinking, oh, I'm feeling my body. I really need some shoulder openers today. But of course, that yoga teacher had perhaps planned something else because they don't know what I want. It's not a tailored, personalized yoga class. It's a group class. So I would show up to that class knowing, oh, I really just need and want some shoulder openers. But we would end up doing an hour of hip openers or balancing poses, for example. And this sort of part of my life, or part of my yoga journey, really illustrates the sort of self-awareness, whether related to your body or to your breath or to your mind, the self-awareness that arises when you start to practice yoga and when you do it consistently and over a period of time, a longer period of time. I had these moments where I just started to notice my hips are tight. I really need to do something about that, or I want to do something about that. Or periods where I would notice, like, hey, my mind is really not focused today. I keep jumping from one task to another. Maybe I should go ahead and do a meditation. I think one of the ways that I also really noticed this is self-awareness is through my breath. A lot of the times I can notice that, for example, at work, I would start breathing quite rapidly and shallowly. And just being able to notice that and to be aware of it is the first step, because once you notice it, you can choose to do something to change it. And that is another beautiful aspect of what can happen when you do yoga. So I think the rest of my yoga journey has been quite interesting. I ended up doing a yoga teacher training and became certified to teach yoga. And I think a lot of my aspects, or sort of the things that happened with my relationship with yoga at that time, were more oriented around how can I help other people as well. And I think if you sort of go into the practice of yoga at the beginning, it's a lot more oriented towards yourself. And that's, of course, not a bad aspect at all. But I think over time, it can become a practice where by becoming self-aware of yourself, you also can become self-aware of others and start to sort of extend that compassion to others as well. Doesn't mean that you need to do this by becoming a yoga teacher, but becoming even more self-aware of your actions, how you interact with others, how you show up in your relationships. And I think on the grand scheme of things, yoga can indeed contribute to that. So those were a lot of things, a lot of things that happen when you do yoga that I wanted to share with you based on my personal experience. Again, I didn't base this on any science, and I didn't want this video to be a sort of, your lung capacity improves or you become less stressed type of video, but to share a little bit more of maybe these overlooked aspects or aspects that are not talked about as much, but that I really noticed appear and change my life. So I hope you found this interesting. Feel free to comment down below what your yoga journey has been like and what you found happened for yourself when you started and continued doing yoga. If you enjoyed this video, I highly suggest checking out this yoga class so you can experience some of the benefits of yoga yourself. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope to see you again soon.